Hey up, mate. Today we're talking all about how you can go from stressed out and not feeling very good about your English to feeling much better about it and achieving some sort of success on your English journey. So let's dive in, shall we? Hey up, mate, and welcome to this episode of the BritSpeakPod. Cheers for finding it today. I appreciate that. So if you're new around here, my name is Dan. I'm a British English teacher and I help newcomers to the UK feel confident about their English so they can live their daily life in the best possible way. I'm also going to help you understand British life, British culture, and of course, British English. Now today, we're going to be talking all about what I think are the keys to kind of unlocking your English confidence. Now, as you probably know, I spend a lot of time working with people who move to the UK or are going to move to the UK. And we work on English, obviously, but we kind of focus more on what it's like to live in a different country that doesn't speak your language. There's a lot of stuff going on. So today we're going to talk about some of that good stuff. But before we get into it, I just very quickly want to tell you about this. Are you still struggling to feel confident when speaking in English, even after all of them hours you've spent studying? Do you still feel stuck in conversations like you just can't find the words you're looking for? Well, trust me when I tell you this, mate. I know the frustration, but I also know the longer you wait to deal with the problem, the worse the problem is going to get. But it doesn't need to be this way. For less than $1 a day, you can get access to the BritSpeakMates community, which will help you solve these problems. You'll get access to daily speaking challenges and the 24/7 live practice room. You'll get a community of other people just like you to help you stay motivated. You're going to be able to get answers to your questions from me and other community members. And you're also going to be able to get weekly speaking practice lessons if you go for the VIP tier. So for just $19 a month, you'll gain all of that so you can finally start feeling confident when you're communicating in English. All you've got to do to sign up is go to the link in the description or visit britspeak.co/BritSpeak-mates. That's britspeak.co/BritSpeak-mates. And I hope to see you in there soon. But for now, back to the episode. Good stuff. So today we've got a lot of stuff to cover and it's going to be quite an interesting episode. I'm going to be a bit vulnerable in today's episode. I'm going to be talking about some of my own journey, but we're going to be looking at what I learned about learning languages by moving to Japan. So we're going to talk about my own language journey and how it changed my teaching style and how I understand people learning languages. So that's going to be something we talk about. We're also going to look at the 5 things you need to work on if you want to overcome language barriers. You know, there's a lot of stuff. It's not just about vocabulary. There's a lot of stuff you need to work on. And I'm going to talk you through what I think are the big things. And then we're going to look at why you don't need more grammar and vocabulary. But what do you need? Well, we're going to talk about it. And that kind of leads me on to the final point, which is I'm going to answer your questions, not about spelling and pronunciation like it says on the screen. I'm going to be answering your questions about today's topic. And today's question is, which skill do you need to work on the most in English? So put your answers in the chat and we'll talk about them at the end of the episode. So, yeah, quite a lot to talk about today. And the first topic I want to talk about is my journey, you know, moving to Japan and how it affected my life. So, yeah, learning a new language to live in a new country, it's bloody hard work, mate. Trust me, I know from experience how difficult it can get. Now, let me tell you a bit of background about me. So in 2016, that's me, stood on the balcony of Akashi Castle. So I moved from Sheffield in the UK over to Akashi in Japan. Now, if you've not heard of that, don't worry. I hadn't either when I moved here. I didn't know. I've heard of Tokyo, but I didn't really know anything else. But next minute, I arrive in Akashi, which is It's kind of a coastal town, famous for octopus. And it's got a very, very big bridge called the Akashi Kaikyo Ohashi, which is the Akashi Straits Bridge. But yeah, it's quite a small town. It's not far from Kobe. Maybe you've heard of Kobe beef before. Anyway, quite nice place. And of course, when you move to a new place, it's amazing. Everything's new. Every time I went in a shop, it was the first time I'd been in that shop. Every time I tried some food, it was like the first time I'd tried that food. Every time I did anything, it was a new experience. And it was totally different, and it was totally amazing, like absolutely amazing. Everything was so exciting. I was starting a new life. And honestly, one of the happiest times of my entire life, I think, that first month. Although it was tough, obviously, but it were really, really incredible feeling. And it's all well and good, but eventually that fades a little bit, and you're left with like the reality of the situation that you're in. You're in a country that doesn't speak your language. You're halfway across the world from everybody you know and love, and you're completely on your own. At least that's the situation I was in, right? So I fast realized that I'd encountered a problem with the language, to be honest. Like, I had learned some Japanese before I went. I bought some textbooks and apps and did a few lessons and things like this. So I knew what I thought were decent Japanese. I thought, yeah, I'll be fine. Well, spoiler alert, it didn't quite work out exactly like that, to be honest. But, we'll get into it. Now, one of the big things was just how overwhelming it is to be faced with a language barrier that is so big, and it just encompasses your entire life. Like, everything is language barrier. Like, everything. No matter what you want to do, you're going to have to deal with a language, and that can be really difficult. And it's not just language barrier. There's so many like cultural differences that you have to try and understand. Like, nobody explains cultural stuff, but then you've got to work it out when you get here. And like, all this stuff goes into communicating effectively and confidently. And to be honest, I found it so difficult to get started with a language. Like, I found I could ask for directions, but I couldn't understand what people were telling me. And it were like, just everything was so difficult. And daily tasks, things like going to the pharmacy because I needed to buy some, medicine, just having to try and explain that. And it was so overwhelming. Like, I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to do anything. I ended up being completely isolated and really, really lonely. If you've ever lived in another country on your own, you know how lonely the experience can be. And honestly, I wanted to go home. In that first 6 months, I nearly gave up and went home a few times. And I've fast become aware that these emotions and these problems are pretty much universal for anyone that moves to a new country. I work with loads of people that move to England, and they experience a lot of the same things. Like, what's easy for you in your own country is suddenly incredibly difficult, and the language, the cultural aspects, the loneliness, it really gets on top of you. And I really struggled with that when I first arrived in Japan. And yeah, I took this photo probably after I've been in Japan about 6 months. And if you look on my face, you can see it. You can see I'm not happy. I mean, this place is called Fushimi Inami. It's Fushimi Inari, sorry. It's really famous in Kyoto. And I was miserable, just like straight up miserable. And it was because I was struggling so much with the language side of it, I had learned some Japanese before I came here. I did buy some textbooks, which are on my shelf over there. And I took lessons for a while. We were a Japanese teacher in Sheffield, and I took lessons there for a while, and I'd got apps and stuff, and I thought I'm going to be fine. But when I actually got here, I realized that all that stuff I'd studied was not the same Japanese as what I was hearing every day, And for example, I really struggled because I moved to an area of Japan called Kansai. And Kansai people don't speak quote unquote standard Japanese. They don't speak Hyojungo, which is standard Japanese. They speak Kansai Ben, which is like a Kansai dialect, if you like. Kind of like people in Yorkshire speaking a Yorkshire dialect and a Yorkshire accent. Same thing, but Japanese, right? Now, they use loads of slang. They use loads of words I didn't know. Like, I'd learned words for like, ikura desu ka, which is how much, but they didn't say that. Like, nambo. And I was like, that's not even close to what I'd learned. And they speak really quick in Kansai. Like, they're really quick. They cut words out. They shorten everything. Like, they do their own thing. And it's really different. So I had learned one thing, thought, okay, I understand enough Japanese to survive, got to Kansai, and none of it was what I'd learned. None of it. So suddenly I felt like, oh, actually, I don't understand anybody. And your confidence just kind of goes, pew. It drops off a cliff because you thought you'd be all right, but actually you're not. And yeah, understanding the fast speech and the colloquial dialect were almost impossible for me at first. So I often felt like left out because, if I was in a conversation, I couldn't really contribute. I'd only got like survival Japanese. So I couldn't really express myself very well. And so I felt like I couldn't really take part in group conversations, which adds to the loneliness of the whole thing. And of course, I tried to go about my daily life as much as I could. Made loads of mistakes. Absolutely loads. Some pretty embarrassing ones as well, to be honest. Quite a lot at first. I would go to the kombini, which is like your corner shop if you're in England. It's like 7-Eleven or whatever. And after they gave me all my stuff and the bag and whatever I'd bought, usually I would say thank you, which in Japanese is arigatou gozaimasu. Or azasu in Kansai. But I often got it mixed up with good morning, which is ohayo gozaimasu, arigatou gozaimasu, ohayo gozaimasu. And I often got them wrong. So I take all my stuff and be like, good morning. I'm like, what are you talking about? And you get outside and you're like, oh, Christ, I got it wrong again. And it happened a lot. And, I made a bunch of mistakes and just stupid things where you'd say the wrong word and look like an idiot. And all this kind of adds up, the constant mistakes, the feeling like I couldn't understand anybody. I couldn't understand what people were saying to me. And I couldn't really express anything other than basic thoughts. It made you feel like scared of conversations. It made me feel like conversations are too much for me right now. I need to take a step back. And that led me to a turning point. This photo of me is in a game center, which is like an arcade. I'm playing Street Fighter 4 probably. And I'm looking grumpy, so I probably lost that game. But if you're listening to the audio podcast, I've got photos on the screen, by the way. Anyway, so here I am in a game center. I'm reaching a turning point. I've been in Japan probably about a year at this point. And I realized I was doing the wrong things. I kind of went backwards in a way that didn't make sense. I was scared of conversations, but I wanted conversations, And what I did is I kind of stepped back. And I thought, okay, well, if I can't handle conversations, I need to study the language more. I spent so much time on apps and textbooks and, just trying to memorize the language, word lists and grammar rules. And, that's because that's how I always thought languages were learned, You have to learn the vocabulary, you have to learn the grammar, and then you can start to use it somehow. And it doesn't really work like that. So anyway, I'm using all these apps and I'm doing all this stuff. And artificially, I feel like I'm making progress, but conversations didn't get any easier. And it kind of led me to realize I needed a new plan of attack because I learned that grammar and vocabulary is important, But that's not going to help me understand the natives who are speaking too quickly for me. Textbook Japanese, like, excuse me, where is the station? Sumimasen, eki wa doko desu ka? Is not going to really help me make friends, you know? And avoiding conversations and putting it off till a later date where I felt more comfortable was actually just holding me back. And yeah, I think at some point after about a year being in Japan, I realized, like, mate, this is not working. You need to try something new. And what I actually learned is that if I want to communicate with people, and that was my goal. I wanted to communicate with people. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to feel less lonely and stuff. Guess what? You actually need to communicate with people if you want to do that. I know it sounds mind-blowing, like, really, Dan? If you want to get good at conversations, you have to have conversations. Who'd have guessed? Well, I'm an idiot, and I didn't work it out straight away. All right. And yeah, I decided I needed a new plan of attack. And that led me to a new approach. This picture on the screen, by the way, is at a Japanese punk festival in Osaka, and a bunch of friends that I made while watching bands. And it's cool. So I really stepped out of my comfort zone at this point. You know, I had the goal to communicate and connect with new people. So I started to do that. Now, what helped me the most? There's a few things that helped me on this little journey. One was I tried to listen to native speakers as much as humanly possible. If I was on the train, I would eavesdrop on the people next to me. If they're talking, I mean, Japanese trains are pretty quiet, but if I could hear a conversation, I was listening to that conversation, picking up words. Did I understand anything? Did I get keywords? What could I work out? I started watching Japanese TV, even though I don't like Japanese TV at all. I think it's weird and boring. Japanese TV is celebrities eating food and saying it's delicious. That's basically Japanese TV. It's proper boring. Anyway, I'd watch Japanese TV a lot. Podcasts, I'd listen to podcasts. I started following Japanese YouTubers and just listening. And I wasn't listening with the intent of, I need to understand every single word. I was listening with the intent of, I better try and get used to trying to catch some words here. I listened to it and, like, what words did I actually hear? And did I understand any of them words that I heard? And kind of building my tolerance to it. One of the biggest problems with English learners is they want everybody to speak slowly. And that don't work. Because if your textbooks and your teachers and the audio CD or MP3s that come with your textbook, if everybody speaks really slowly and clearly, when you rock up in Sheffield, you're not going to understand anybody because nobody speaks like that. So I think it's one of them things that you really have to bite the bullet and just start. Everything's difficult at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So I decided, all right, I'm going to have to listen to loads of native speakers for a bit until I work it out. The other thing I worked out is I'm going to take every single possible bloody opportunity I can to try and speak to somebody. So what I would do, even though I were proper nervous and self-conscious and, shitting myself, basically, for want of a better term, I would try and speak to people. Like every Friday after work, I would go to a standing bar. A standing bar in Japanese is called tachinomi, and basically it's a room that's maybe got 3 tables at chest height, and there's about 60 people in there all huddled around these tables, right? And I'd just go there, have a few beers, and what I would do is I'd learn a new expression. And I'd go there and I'd say it to everyone just to see what they said. I said the same sentence about 100 times, but I heard 100 different responses and I picked up some new words and stuff. And that's one of the things that I started doing. Started going to gigs. I'm a big music fan. I love music. Any band that were playing near me, I went there and I started seeing the same faces and I tried to talk to people about bands I liked and, this kind of thing. Even, I went to the 7-Eleven on the way home from work and somebody stood outside smoking or having a beer or something. I'm going to try and say hello. And every chance I got, I tried to speak to people. I mean, they weren't very deep conversations. They weren't very good, but I tried. And I focused much more on, so when somebody said something to me, I didn't try and catch every single word. Because if you think about it in your own language, you do this too. I just picked out enough key words that I could work out what the bloody hell somebody is saying. If they said something like for example, in English, I'm going to shop you one out, that's very hard to understand. But I heard shop, all right, and I heard gonna. Oh, he's going to the shop. Okay, I've got it. Like that thing. I started just trying to pick out the key words so I could understand the situation. I didn't need every word, just enough. And surprisingly, when you're just picking out key words, you'll start to pick out more and more the more you do it. And when I didn't catch anything, I got over the fear of asking people, I'm sorry, mate, can you say that again? Mo ichido ite kudasai. And yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. Another thing that I had to learn very quick, I had very limited vocabulary. So I had to find ways to explain what I meant, even though I didn't know the word, right? For an example, in English, I could be like, oh, I need them things like it's like two knives together. You put your fingers in it and you can cut like paper, or a barber can cut your hair. Oh, Dan, you mean scissors? Yeah, I meant scissors. I couldn't remember the word scissors, but I told you using other words. I learned this skill in Japanese. And that helped me stop freezing in conversations, And yeah, I think like that's the thing. That was the new approach that I took. And I started to focus just on communicating. All I wanted to do was talk to people. I didn't care if my grammar was good. I didn't care if I knew exactly the right word. As long as I could deliver that message and I felt like I could talk to a person, that boosted my confidence so much more than, doing the fill in the gaps exercises or whatever it was. And I really focused more on, instead of trying to learn new stuff all the time, I'm just going to get better at using what I already knew. So learn to get good with what you've got is a big piece of advice I would give you as well. And yeah, it really taught me a lot of lessons. This is probably my first friends that I made in Japan. This is a couple called Ryo and Saori. And I met him in Akashi and they were weird and cool. I haven't spoken to them for a long time, but yeah, they were cool. They were interesting people. Anyway, so eventually through just trying, I got to a point where, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not quote unquote fluent in Japanese, right? But I'm confident enough to negotiate most of my daily life real world situations quite comfortably. I can go to the tax office and talk to the tax people. I can go to the doctor. I can go to the city hall. I can do almost everything that I need to do. It's not easy, but I can do it. And I slowly but surely, I'm getting better. I don't really study anymore. I just do. And that's how I get better, right? So I didn't become perfect, but my goal was to communicate, And that was really cool. And I think that the biggest thing I learned is that I was wrong about language learning. And at least I was wrong about my own language learning. And I think a lot of people make the same mistake. It's like you worry way too much about memorizing the language, and you don't worry anywhere near enough about actually using the bloody language. Okay? And I think that's probably the thing that made the biggest difference for me, that mind shift, that change of mindset. And, I started to make friends and, started to enjoy life in Japan, and everything became a bit easier. Started to feel part of a community. I didn't feel so lonely anymore. And I think that's really, really important. So the key takeaways from all of this is that it's not just rules and words, mate. If you're learning English because you're going to live in England, it's not just rules and words. It's, I understand it's difficult to communicate in English and you get stuck, and it's frustrating when you know the words but you can't find them, or you freeze up because you can't remember which grammar pattern to use. I understand it's hard. But it's not just rules and words. That's not what language is. It's more than that. And I think, like, it's very overwhelming when you first realize how big the problem is. It's such a big problem that it gets really overwhelming. And you've got to have a plan to deal with the overwhelm. So, yeah, I kind of made a strategy. I worked out what is my immediate goal and what am I going to do to get to it. And I didn't worry about academic Japanese because I didn't need it. So get rid of what you don't need and focus on what you do need. I learned this the hard way. Doing something is much better than knowing something when it comes to language. Knowing a grammar pattern's great, but using it is totally different. So do more than know. That's one big thing that I learned. I also learned that mistakes are good. I used to be terrified of making mistakes, but then I realized a mistake is a chance to learn. Sounds good. And this is a really big one. Perfection is not a thing. I used to think, I can just wait until my Japanese is good enough. It's never good enough, ever. And your English is the same. If you try and wait for it to be good enough, you'll be waiting forever, mate, because it's not a thing. Perfection is not a thing. The only thing perfection is, it's a lie that keeps you stuck. That's basically what perfection is. So the best piece of advice I can give you is stop trying to be perfect and just start trying. That's 100% the key to this. And yeah, basically that is my journey moving to Japan and being in Japan and learning to deal with the language and what it taught me about learning languages, right? And I think probably some of you guys, if you're thinking about moving to the UK or you moved to the UK recently, or any English-speaking country or any country for that matter, you probably can relate to some of that. And hopefully some of my, doing things in such a bad way, you can learn lessons from that and do it in a better way so you don't, wash your clothes with shampoo for a long time like somebody might have done who's named Dan. It is what it is. Anyway, so that's my journey into learning Japanese. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about today is I strongly believe if you want to communicate with people that you meet in a language that you're learning, especially if you move to the UK, there are 5 key skills that you need to develop to communicate effectively with somebody. Now, if you can learn these 5 things, everything gets easier. Absolutely everything becomes more manageable and everything, you'll just enjoy it a lot more, to be absolutely honest with you. So there are 5 key skills, right? I call them the 5 C's. This is the BritSpeak 5C method, or, whatever you want to call it, right? So let me run through what the 5 C's are, first of all. So the first C stands for connection. Now, when I say connection, what I mean is like truly engaging with other people, right? Like building a relationship with somebody, like really understanding and empathizing with that person. Because without connecting to people, communication feels like mechanical. It feels like talking to ChatGPT or something. And it's awkward, isn't it? And it also makes it really hard to make friends and build relationships and actually feel understood without connection. So connection is one thing that you're definitely going to need. The next C stands for clarity. Like, it's the importance of expressing ideas clearly and directly, yeah? Now, without clarity, it's just a bunch of information thrown at somebody and be like, good luck, mate, you work out what I'm trying to say. And, it means your message is probably going to get misunderstood or ignored, and you get miscommunication, and that's frustrating and it hurts your confidence. So we don't want any of that. So clarity is proper important. Now, the next one is a bit of a cheat, but it stands for clear pronunciation, because P don't start with C, so pronunciation don't start with C. So we put clear at the beginning, and now we've got one of the 5 C's. All right, so clear pronunciation. Obviously, if your vocabulary and grammar is really good, but nobody can understand the words you're saying because you can't pronounce them very well, that seems like a bad idea, mate. So without clear pronunciation, others are going to not understand what you're trying to say, and that's not going to be good, basically. So when it comes to English, we've got sounds that probably don't exist in your language or are difficult for you to pronounce. And if you don't get that sort of stuff right, communication is going to be a bit of a nightmare, mate. So, think about it. Next, we've got context. Context, this is like adapting the communication style to fit the situation that you're in, and the people that you're talking to at that time, right? Without understanding the context, you're going to maybe be way too formal in a casual situation, which is a common thing that English learners do. Or maybe you'll seem really impolite because you should be more formal and you're really casual. Like, you want to avoid these kind of misunderstandings. So understanding the context of the conversation and the communication that you're trying is really important. And the last one, the hardest one to find, to be honest, is confidence. Now, it's the foundation for communication, basically. Without confidence, you're not going to communicate very well. And even if you've got the best skills, if you've got zero confidence, it's not going to come across. And the self-doubt and the putting yourself down is going to stop you from expressing yourself fully. And those are the 5 C's of communication. These are the 5 things that you need to work on if you want to communicate with people in English. Now, that's all well and good. We kind of know what they are and why they're important, but, great. Now what? Well, I'm going to give you a few tips for each one, okay? So when it comes to connection, there are a few things that you need to do. You need to practice active listening. And when I say active listening, I don't mean listening to try and catch all the words that they say. We're not trying to focus on the understanding, on the meaning of the words. We're trying to understand what the person is trying to say. That's not the same thing. It's not a listening test. It's a connection to a person. I want to understand what they're saying and why they're saying it. I want to show an interest in what they're trying to say. So, don't interrupt people. Focus on the message that they're trying to say, and maybe you can, double check, like, do you mean this kind of thing? Whatever it is. So that's really important. Another thing that you can do to build better connection is learn conversation starters. So learn some very simple expressions that you can use in a lot of different situations. For example, when I was learning Japanese, I often learned like, what did you do this week? As a way to start a conversation with people. Or how was your weekend? Or what do you think about this recent event that's just happened? Whatever it is, some kind of basic questions that you are really versatile and kind of make sure you've mastered them. So you can always pull them out in a conversation and it'll help you understand what that other person thinks or feels, right? Another thing you can start doing is observing non-verbal cues, right? Especially in the UK, the words that we say don't necessarily match the meaning we're trying to deliver. The way we say it, the body language, the facial expressions, all of that stuff carries a lot of weight in British English. So start paying attention to non-verbal cues, like understand their body language a bit or their facial expressions and try to understand the way they're reacting to things. All that stuff is going to help you get the message, right? And it's going to help you understand where they're coming from. One thing you can do is mirroring. So mirroring is basically kind of adapting your communication style to match the other person, like you're a mirror for them. So, you've got the similar tone, you're speaking at a similar level of formality, maybe casual or formal, and you're using similar pace and vocabulary, and that's going to help you connect because you're showing that you've got a lot in common, right? Naturally, people do this. If somebody is really happy, you're going to act happy around them, right? And this is a form of mirroring. and it's something you can practice doing. And like I said earlier, focus on the meaning, not the language. It's not a listening test, mate. We're not here to give you a perfect score because you caught all the right words. Understand what the person means and what they're trying to express, not the words that they're using, right? Cool. So connection. Those are some things that you can work on. The next one is clarity. So first up, simplify your sentences. I work with loads of people that try and get too fancy. They try using really academic English and really complex grammar. Excuse me, good sir, is there any chance that you would partake in a brown, warm cup of caffeinated beverage? You what, mate? Oh, would you like a cup of coffee? Well, why don't you just say that? Like nobody does that. What are you doing? So yeah, people seem to think that complex equals better. Native speakers don't do that. Exactly. If I were going to offer somebody a cup of coffee, I'd just be like, coffee? I wouldn't bother with anything else. Coffee, mate. And yeah, it's kind of weird. I worked with I'm working with a student called Wojtek from Poland. And he had this problem. He would try and make everything really complex and really advanced. Till one day I was like, mate, why are you doing that? Like, natives don't do that. Why don't you just simplify it a bit? And then that was probably like the biggest turning point for him, because he was like, oh, okay. And then he got so much better at communicating because he didn't have to put pressure on himself to find the perfect and best possible way to say it. We just communicated, and it made a big difference. Another thing you can do is when somebody tells you something and you're not sure you understand, paraphrase it back to them. Like if they tell you something, you're like, just to check, do you mean, and then say what you think they mean, right? So paraphrasing to check that you understand something, really important. Next, try and organize your thoughts before speaking. Like a lot of people in a conversation, you don't really have that much time to think, but you need to at least try and organize the next sentence you say before you say it. So it's not just throwing random words at people and hoping that they understand. There's a few techniques you can learn, like the 5W1H or the PREP methods. Really good for helping you organize your thoughts. Also, don't use jargon. Don't use like crazy vocabulary that only people who studied that thing would know, unless it can be helped, right? Use plain, everyday English. I promise you, no one will be impressed if you use weird words, especially if you use them in the wrong way. Like I see all these like Instagrammers, and they're like basic English versus advanced English. And they always give you advanced words that make no sense in the context, and no native speaker would ever say that. Instead of good, why don't you say exquisite? Because nobody fucking says that, mate. That's why. And it's, like a big thing for me. I really hate that. Just keep it simple, mate, and you can't go wrong. And focus on delivering the message. Perfect grammar and the exact right word for every single situation is nice, but you can do a lot with bad grammar and basic vocabulary. You can go a long way with bad grammar and vocabulary that, doesn't get you so far. You can do a lot with that, to be honest. So focus on delivering the message, not perfection, yeah? Good. Now we're on to everybody's favorite, pronunciation. And notice I didn't say accent. There's a big difference between pronunciation and accent. We're not talking about accent. Accents are part of your identity. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is clear pronunciation. So if you want to do that, there's a few things you can do. Shadowing. I'm a big fan of shadowing. Now, I did a full episode on shadowing before, but basically it's listening to some audio of a native speaker, pausing it and trying to copy it. And you mimic native speakers and the intonation patterns they use and the stress and that kind of stuff. So shadowing helps you mimic native speakers and sound more natural. You also need to work on basic sound production. There'll be specific sounds in English that don't exist in your language, or they work differently. And for example, TH is one that a lot of people struggle with. This, those, three, these kind of words. People struggle with that TH sound sometimes. Plenty of native speakers do, to be fair. But, if that's a problem for you, you need to work on it. Or the schwa sound. In British English, we've got the, like mother, brother. the banana, London, all these words, right? So if you're not good at that, practice it. The next thing, I often tell people to record yourself speaking and listen back to it. If you're doing some speaking practice or pronunciation practice or whatever it is, you need to make sure that you're recording yourself and then listen back to it. And I know everybody's like, but Dan, I don't like my own voice. Nobody does. But if you want to get better, listening to your own voice is a good way to realize where your weak points are. Because the first time you listen back to your voice, you're always a bit like, is that how I actually sound? Is that what other people hear? But it's a bit of a shock. But eventually you'll start to be able to pick out your own weaknesses and you can work on them. Another thing is pronunciation is more than just making the sounds correctly. It's also about things like stress and intonation. So like where to go up, where to go down, where to emphasize words, where to weaken words. And this will help you understand like what native speakers do. So learn some stress patterns, learn some intonation patterns, learn the basics so you can start to apply it to your own communication, right? And another thing, a bit more advanced, is practice things like chunking and rhythm. Now, English is a stress-based language. Now, a lot of languages like Japanese is like this, it's syllable-based language. Each sound has got equal emphasis. Like arigatou, arigato. Like everything's equal. Not exactly that, but you know, generally. So it's a syllable-based language, and syllable timing is very important in Japanese. English is not. We're a stress-based language. There's a rhythm to the language. So if you notice when I'm speaking, it almost always falls on the rhythm of the beat. And this is really important to sound natural in English. So work out where we're pushing words together and linking sounds and where the stress is falling in the rhythm. These are all things that you can learn. So if you want to communicate and have clear pronunciation, these are things that you can work on. Next, context is a big one. In my experience, most people are way too formal. They learn like in classroom English, textbook English, and it's too formal. So, you know, we've got to learn some context. So you've got to learn to adapt to the situation. And the way I would do this is learn how to express yourself in two different ways, formal and casual. So you've got both versions ready depending on the situation. Understand British cultural norms. As British people, we're very, very indirect. We don't really say exactly what we mean, especially when we're giving bad news or something like that. We're a bit weird with small talk. We almost always start talking about the weather, which is also a bit strange, you know? And we're very sarcastic. We love dry, dark humor. And if you don't know these things about British people, it can be hard to actually communicate with us. So it's something to probably pay a bit more attention to. Understanding colloquial terms is another thing. Colloquial, I kind of mean like stuff that's exclusive to that dialect. So this is going to be things like slang and idioms and these weird British expressions that we use that... Now, a lot of people tell me, like, I don't want to learn slang. I don't understand slang. I don't want to learn slang. Like, great, you don't want to learn it. Nobody's making you use it. If you don't want to use slang, that's up to you. But we're gonna. And if you want to understand us, you're probably going to have to spend a bit of time learning some of these words. So the good news for that is, by the way, I've got a free guide you can download. It's 50 of the most essential British expressions. It's totally free. It's called British English Made Easy. The link is in the description. You can download it now, so check it out and start learning some colloquial British English, yeah? Now, you could also practice role plays. You could practice doing things like ordering food at McDonald's and then ordering food at the Savoy, you know, they're not the same thing. Or practice talking to your mate in the pub or practice talking to a colleague in a meeting, you know, practice this kind of stuff. And we need to kind of address the elephant in the room, accents and dialects. Now, in the UK, whether you like it or not, there are at least 50 accents and probably just as many dialects where they say things in different ways, they pronounce things in different ways, they use different words. And if you expect everybody in the UK to sound the same and you move there, mate, you're going to have a very bad time. If you go to Sheffield and think everybody's going to sound like they're on the BBC, you've got no chance. So spend some time, especially if you're going to live in the UK, spend some time learning the accent where you're going to be. That's one thing you can do. And the last one, the most difficult one, confidence. So the way I approach confidence is set small goals. Like if your goal is to be fluent, that's a shit goal. It's not going to work. So set small goals. Maybe this week I'm going to greet at least one stranger. You're dropping your kids off at school and you say to one of the other parents, good morning, how are you today? That's it. That's your goal for this week. So set very small goals that incrementally get harder, right? Prepare for conversations before you have them. Think about the most common conversations that you have in your own life. What did you do last weekend? All that kind of stuff. And then prepare some key phrases in advance that you've already kind of worked out. That's what I did in Japanese. I understood roughly what people were going to ask me, and I just had stuff already prepared that I could tell them. Great. Nice. And when that happens and you're able to have a basic conversation, celebrate. Now, British people are very bloody negative. We're very pessimistic people usually. So it's easy to focus on the negatives. So no, sack that. Make sure you celebrate every small win, because every small win is a step in the right direction, and that's confidence. You need to also change your mindset. Like, I used to think, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I don't know anything. That's no good. What you need to focus on is not what you don't know. Focus on what you can do in the language. Okay, I don't know everything, but I can go to the shop and I can talk to the staff member to ask them if they've got a different colour. Cool, that's good. Focus on that. Focus on the positives. And a big one is consistent daily practice. You really, really need consistent daily practice, especially speaking. I think you've got to really practice speaking if you want to build your confidence, because it's the hardest thing to do. And I think it's the one thing that people struggle with. Now, if you're struggling to practice speaking, this week I've launched what's called BritSpeakMates. It's like a school community, right? And it's designed to give you speaking practice every single day. So you go in there, and I can see in the chat, there's a few people from the group in the chat today. You go there and you get like a daily speaking challenge, a little challenge that will force you to practice speaking every single day. There's also like a live WhatsApp room so you can chat with other people, and you can ask me a question if you get stuck. And there's also a live room where you can find language partners and go there and practice together. And there's weekly live streams, like workshops working on things that you're struggling with, and basically everything you could possibly need to practice speaking every single day, either on your own or with other people. And it's called BritSpeakMates. I just launched it, and I think if you're struggling with kind of speaking practice, it's something you should check out. It's $19 a month to get access to all of that stuff, and the link is in the description. So go and check it out, because I think you'll find it very, very useful. So those then are the 5 keys to understanding how to communicate better in English, right? Now, the last topic for today is a bit of an interesting one. Earlier, I asked you guys, what is the hardest part about speaking in English, right? And now, I haven't seen many of the answers in the chat yet, but what I have done is ask this question about 1 million times to other people I work with. And one answer that always comes up is, I need more vocabulary. So what is the hardest part about speaking English? I need more vocabulary. And to be honest, I disagree, mate. And I'm going to tell you why I think this is wrong. So, the traditional way that languages are taught to people, I believe, is very ineffective. I know it's very ineffective because in school I learned French for 2 years and Spanish for 1 year, and I don't know anything. For some reason, I remember the word un sacapuntas, which is a pencil sharpener in Spanish. And I know how to say, je ne comprends pas. I don't understand in French. Like, useless, absolutely useless, right? And the traditional method of teaching somebody a language is they memorize a bunch of stuff and then they spit it out in the correct order. That's basically what traditional language teaching is. And that's why people feel that, oh, I just need more grammar. I just need more vocabulary. Like, that's the problem. I haven't memorized enough things yet. That's why I'm not able to communicate. It's because I haven't done enough language learning, right? And maybe this, you're worried about tenses. Maybe this is you're worried about, using the correct grammar pattern and so on. I mean, this is kind of an anxiety that comes from it, but traditional way of learning languages, I feel, is really ineffective. Now, grammar is one thing that people get overly obsessed with. And for me, grammar is like learning the rules of the game. Like, let's say football, for an example, right? Learning the rules of the game is important. You need to know that you can't pick the ball up and, whatever else rules, you need to know what offside is. But spending years just memorizing the rules doesn't make you any better at playing football. You know what I mean? You're not going to suddenly be a world-class striker because you spent ages reading rule book. It doesn't work that way. So if you want to, you need to know some grammar, but it's not a year-long thing. Like, you should kind of read the rules once and pick it up as you go along, to be honest. But, grammar is not the be-all and end-all. Vocab is important. Let's get this right. You need vocabulary. Without vocabulary, you can't do anything. But it's not a magic cure to all your English problems. Like, it's not going to fix everything. If you just think, okay, I'm not very good, I'm not very confident in speaking, I know I'll learn 300 new words, how is that going to fix the problem? It's not. Now, in English, there's what's called the core vocabulary. It's the Oxford Dictionary made a list of the 3,000 most commonly used English words, right? And if you know the 3,000 words on this list, and bear in mind, a lot of these words are things like and it, and be, and go. Really basic words that you learn day one. If you learn these 3,000 words, you can understand at least 75% of daily life English. 75% with 3,000 words. Imagine how much you can do with 75%. If you learn the core 5,000, which is an extra 2,000 words, that's like 95% of everything that you're going to hear and see on a daily basis. So why are you trying to learn 20,000 words when 5,000 will get you 95%? And like I said, one of my biggest bugbears in this world is these fucking Instagrammers that are like incredibly old-fashioned and formal English to try and make you sound fancy when it don't fucking make any sense at all. Like, instead of asking somebody, what do you think about this? You could say, excuse me, sir, perhaps what is your opinion about this particular topic? Now, fuck off. Like, nobody needs that. Just vocabulary. Nobody's going to think you're smart. Nobody's going to think, wow, that guy's super intelligent because he used an academic English word from C2 textbook. Nobody cares. Honestly, we don't care. Just focus on what you actually need to use the language for. Oh, I got a little bit angry then. I could feel it. Anyway. Next. Imagine you're trying to build a table, right? So you've got some wood, you've got some nails, and you've got a hammer and a saw and whatever else, right? So you've kind of got everything you need there, but you're like, I don't really know how to build a table. I don't feel very good building a table. I'm not sure how big I need to cut the wood. I'm not sure how many nails I should use. And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to B&Q or whatever it's called, some hardware store, and I'm going to buy like 3,000 more nails. I'm going to buy 5 new hammers and maybe 3 or 4 new saws. And then you come home and you're like, is that going to make you any better at building a table? Is it? I mean, maybe you've got a saw that now does a different kind of thing. But if you don't know what you're doing with the basic ones, why are you getting the advanced stuff? If you want to build a table, practice building a table, mate. Don't spend time and effort learning about other tools that you could use when you can't use the ones you've already got. So this is kind of the same thing. What's the point in learning more vocabulary and grammar when you can't do the basics? And another thing that really, really winds me up is the language industry, the language learning industry, the companies that make a lot of money on people learning English, they love it that you think this way. They love it because they can tell you, like, mate, I understand you don't feel very confident. Don't worry. All you need to do is buy this app with this little bird on it that gets angry if you don't do your reviews every day. Don't worry, mate. All you need is another textbook. Just one more textbook, and that's going to fix everything. It's only £19.99. Just buy it. It'll solve all your problems. Don't worry. You just need this one more course. It's easy. Just one more course. It'll fix all the problems. You're so close. You just need a little bit more. Don't know about you, but that absolutely boils my blood. It takes advantage of people because it's not going to fix your problem, and it keeps you on an endless cycle of running on the hamster wheel, thinking just one more, just the next thing, just the next thing, and it never gets any better. So, yeah, I don't like that, to be honest. Right, anyway, that's why I think it's wrong that you feel vocabulary is going to fix all your problems. Now, let me explain why I think practice is better than more language. Doing something is better than knowing something when it comes to applying. Let's imagine your goal is to learn to play piano, right? You could know everything there is to know about a piano. You could you could read the textbooks, you could learn to read music, you can study where all the chords go, you can memorize all the finger patterns and the scales, and you could spend years listening to other people talk about pianos. And then you sit down at a piano. Don't mean you can play it, does it? I mean, maybe you'll be able to do a little bit, but unless you've actually sat down and done it for a long time, you're not going to get any better. So if you want to play piano, the best way is to play the bloody piano as much as you can. If you practice every single day, you're going to be so much better than somebody that spent 10 years learning about different scales and stuff. It's just a fact of life. Also, it's like another thing that people don't understand is English is not an information-based transaction. English is more about application. History and geography and chemistry are information-based subjects where you learn the facts and you regurgitate them. English is about application because there's no one exact correct answer. There's lots of different ways and it's all subjective, right? So it means that they treat it like you just need more information, but actually what you need is more application. And I guess the best way to talk about this actually is if you learn a grammar pattern once, right? And you're like, okay, jobs are good and I've finished, I've learned that grammar pattern. Next. That's not going to work. It's like going to the gym, picking up a weight once and be like, okay, I've done that one. All right, don't mean you're going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, does it? You've got to do it loads of times, and practice in English is the same, right? Speeding up your progress by applying what you've already learned it is really important as well. Like, you don't know what you actually know until you try and use it. Like, in theory, you know loads of stuff, but in a conversation, if you can't find any of that stuff, what's the point? So test your weak points by trying them out. And progress is more important than perfection, and you only make progress through practice, basically. And I think perfection, like I said, is a lie that keeps you stuck, and progress is way more important. The only way you make progress is practice, and practice builds confidence, and that's what we're looking for, and that's why practice is more important. So here are some things that you should start trying to do today. Start practicing speaking or practicing whatever for 15 minutes every single day. 15 minutes is nothing. It could be 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at lunchtime, 5 minutes in the evening. You can find 15 minutes a day. Everybody can find 15 minutes a day. And you've got to consistently practice speaking every single day, which is a big part of my BritSpeakMates community, why I do daily homework challenges. So you don't have to worry about it. You just go there, look at the challenge, do it. It'll take you 10 to 15 minutes and then your practice is done for the day. You don't have to worry about it. And when you submit your homework, your daily speaking challenge, I'll give you feedback on what you did well and what you didn't do so well so you can do it better next time. So BritSpeakMates will help you do that. But even if you don't use BritSpeakMates, 15 minutes a day, practice, set a schedule, and do it. You can practice on your own. There's nothing wrong with practicing speaking on your own. You know, a lot of people say, but Dan, I've got nobody to practice with. You don't need anybody to practice with. You can practice on your own. Shadowing, great way to practice on your own. Reading stuff out loud, very good way to practice on your own. There's loads of ways to practice speaking if you're on your own. So stop making excuses. You can find people to practice with online. The BritSpeakMates community, another great way. There's other people there that you can practice with. You don't have to do it on your own. You can do it on your own, but you don't have to. There's ways to find speaking partners. There's apps. There's ways to find native speakers, language exchange. There's always ways to do it. So find people to practice with is another thing that you should start trying to do. We talked about it earlier, but record yourself speaking, even though it's weird and awkward. At the end of every single day, when you get home from work or school or whatever, you've had your dinner, you've had your bath, and you're getting ready for bed, take your phone, open the voice recorder and be like, today I went to the supermarket and I bought 12 tomatoes and 3 onions, or, you know, whatever weird thing you did today. Do it every day. Why not? What you got to lose? And you'll start noticing patterns, you'll start noticing weaknesses, and you can work on them. Good stuff. And you can track your progress and reflect on your progress by what I do with Japanese. I keep like a little log. I write down, what did I study? What materials did I use? And then I write down, how did I feel about my practice? What were good? What were bad? What do I want to improve? And by tracking those things, I know where I'm going. So this is something else, like reflect on your practice and get feedback if you can. Like if you join BritSpeakMates, you can get feedback on all of your practice, and I'll tell you what you should work on. But if not, tell yourself, like, oh, I didn't feel comfortable pronouncing the TH sound. Great. You know, you need to work on that tomorrow. And I think all of those things are proper important. So start practicing 15 minutes every day. Practice on your own, or practice with other people you find online. Record yourself speaking and make sure you track your practice and reflect on your progress. And that is one of the main things that you can do to improve your English. And that's why practice is more important than more vocabulary, mate. And yeah, good stuff. And I talked about it a bunch there. So, you know, BritSpeakMates, $19 a month. You get access to the school community, daily homework with feedback that'll help you practice speaking. You don't need to worry about what to practice. Just do it. You know, live practice rooms, other speakers, live streams. You can ask me a question. I'll send you a video answer. All of that's included. So check it out. The link is in the description. So today we talked about a lot. And right at the beginning, I asked you guys a question, like what is a skill that you need to work on the most? So let's have a look in the chat. So speaking. Ahmed said speaking is the skill. I mean, yeah, speaking, but that's a big thing, isn't it? Do we mean like talking to friends? Do we mean pronunciation? But yeah, speaking is a skill that's very difficult. Let's see what else we've got. Bunch of comments, me talking about Japan is what I've got. Okay, Nadine says, they want to get rid of the fear of talking. So they fear speaking. Okay. So once again, the fear of speaking is real. I understand. You know, it's hard to make yourself speak in another language. It's terrifying when you're worried about making mistakes, and maybe that person's going to think I'm unintelligent because I'm not very good at English, and all the negative self-talk can be really difficult. And I think the best way to overcome it is by doing it. I know it's scary, but the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. It's like if you're scared of heights, you slowly go a little bit higher and a little bit higher until your tolerance builds. And I think it's the same thing for getting over the fear of speaking, because if you don't do it, the fear is never going to go away. If you do it, it will slowly get better. So I know which option I would choose. Ace says, people getting nuts if I speak fast, they could not understand, so I need to compromise. Yeah, like, I think a lot of learners struggle with the transition from teachers and clear English and very slow BBC learning English podcasts to natives. There's a big difference, and it's hard to keep up, and it's really hard to to kind of make that work. So yeah, I understand. What else we got? Nadine also says small talk is difficult. Yeah, this is a skill you can learn. It's very important. So let's see what else we've got. Tefo, who's a member of the BritSpeakMates community, says, "Hey up, mate. Connection, not perfection. That is what I really want to reach, not to mention enjoying the English learning journey. You know, no one is perfect." Couldn't agree more, mate. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Connection is what we're aiming for, not perfection. Nadine says, what I personally understand in pronunciation is that you need to understand how the sound is made with your mouth, position of the tongue, etc. Every language has their own thing. Yeah, that's true. Like muscle memory is a big thing, like learning where you're supposed to put your tongue and where you're supposed to let the air come out and where you're supposed to use your vocal cords and your jaw position and your mouth, and all this stuff is really, really important. And it takes time to learn. You can't just suddenly naturally do it, you know. So that's a good one. Thank you for that comment. But Nadine also says, I have trouble with tenses. Okay. Now, a lot of people get a bit worried, like, oh, when am I supposed to use past perfect versus past perfect continuous and stuff? And people, oh, when do I use third conditional? Third conditional is really difficult. Third conditional is something we use when we've got a past regret, and that's about it. Like, we don't use it very much. So rather than focusing on, oh, I struggle with tenses, think about the situations. Like, okay, I need to be able to talk about last weekend. Okay, now work out what tense you need to be able to do that. Probably I'm going to be using past simple and past continuous to talk about what was happening when. I don't need to know everything. I just need to know in that situation, what do I need? And that's a better way of looking at it. Serge from France. Hey, Serge, how you doing? He says, I don't want to run on a hamster wheel. Sounds bad, doesn't it? Yeah. Don't do it. Let's see what else we've got. A good tip from Fernando here. They said, try to speak in front of a mirror. Yeah, great. Or even better if you can record yourself on video talking. Because when you're talking in front of a mirror, you can see your mouth, and that will help you understand if your mouth's in the right position or not. So yeah, great tip, Fernando. Great. Okay. And yeah, that's basically today's podcast. It was a long one. I think it's over an hour long, but I got a bit excited talking about some of this stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. We talked about my Japanese journey and how it changed the way that I think about learning languages. We talked about the 5 C's and how you can start working on those things to improve your English communication. And I talked a bit about why practice is more important than vocabulary. So good stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah. And then we'll be back again next week with another episode of the podcast. But until then, look after yourself. Enjoy the practice. Come and look at BritSpeakMates. It's pretty cool. So do it now. And I'll catch you next week. See you there.